They're full blown adults, so they do their own thing, but they're good kids.
Yeah. And Giovanna, anything interesting since the last time we talked?
Oh, well, not really. I mean, I think about our conversations all the time. Politics and all this fun stuff is always on my mind. So I've been thinking nonstop about the last time I was on here.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Um, I have been on Clubhouse these last couple of days, and I thought Facebook was kind of wild with some of the things that came out of there. But I mean, for instance, I asked a conservative what was the John Lewis Voting Act. And they could all tell me that they were against it, but no one could tell me what it was. Um, I've had discussions on whether or not we should start the draft again. Um, I've also had discussions on, and this is kind of directed at you, Javon, and your sister, um, that young people have the right, not have the right, they have the will to protest, but they don't follow it up in the same numbers. And the reason why, I think you said something about this last time we talked, John, is that you don't believe that you can make a difference or a change. Am I misstating that?
Uh, yeah, I don't remember saying that specifically. I know my generation's really. It seems to me that we're really motivated for change. Well, not even motivated. We're just tired of what we have going on now. So I don't think that. I don't feel that way at all. Actually,
So
I mean,
you
there
do.
are some things that feel helpless. Like like I think the fact that it feels helpless is why we're moving, towards more socialistic views and stuff. Because what we have now, we cannot fix. That's what we feel helpless about.
Uh,
That's what.
do you echo that, Jillian?
Yeah, to an extent. I think it's not necessarily a very clear answer, and I think that a lot of people in our generation are kind of on different pages because of how isolated you can be in your bubble of the media. Um, but I think in general, there is a lot of mental, like willpower, and not a lot of knowing the how of things. Um, but I think in general, people are on the right track to like being super motivated for change and getting out there.
Um, Bill, now, uh, Javon said that S word, and a lot of people of your generation, not so much my generation, but of your generation, are very afraid of that word. But yet, and still, you keep paying into Social Security, you keep paying into public programs. So, why is it so scary when Javon's generation mentions it? And that word is socialism.
Well, here's you mentioned people being unable to define things. That's one of the great things. And I keep remembering Chief Justice, when he was asked to define pornography, said, I can't define it, but I know when I see it. That's how people tend to be about lots of things, like communism, socialism, and now the newest thing that people have lost their minds about but don't know what it is critical race theory. So when you actually ask people to tell you what socialism is, they come with a lot of things that are actually deal with totalitarianism, right? Or authoritarianism. And while you do sometimes find socialist regimes that are authoritarian or totalitarian, you also can find capitalist countries that are totalitarian. and are authoritarian. I mean, Generalissimo Franco holding on line one. So, Pinochet, party of two. There's lots of things that people think they know about politics, but they're wrong, right? Either because they have intentionally misunderstood, because I find that more and more. People misunderstand something because they don't really want to understand it, or they've simply been told all the wrong information. They decided to believe the wrong information that they've been told, which I also find in equal parts. So when people are afraid of socialism, the fear of socialism is rooted in one of two things. One, not knowing what it is, which we just talked about, or two, it's a holdover from, the Red Scare and then the subsequent, I guess we'll call it echoes of the Red Scare that dominated, the generation when I became a young officer candidate, which was the 80s, the last part of the Reagan administration. I became an officer candidate in the second administration of Ronald Reagan, and I had the rather disconcerting experience of standing in a ready room. I think it might have been Fort Monroe, which I don't think is in existence anymore. Here I am, a young cadet, preparing myself to serve this country and all this stuff, and I'm watching, Major General John Singlaub, and I'm watching Oliver North and lots of other people lie, just flat out lie, prevaricate, pick a term, whatever you like, to the American people about what they were and were not doing, in Nicaragua and with the Sandinistas and the Contras and all sorts of stuff. So when people are afraid of, Castro, and they're afraid of, whoever it is, Venezuela, and they're afraid of this and they're afraid of that, their fear is not rooted in the thought that America is going to become a socialist. Because while that's not impossible, I mean, it's something that sort of could happen, the way that we would become socialist in a country that has this level of resources and money would be very different from the socialism that you see in a place like Cuba. Like, people somehow forget that, right? That if we become socialists, it'll be like Cuba. It's something you'll see Studebaker Hawks rolling down the street. No, that's not what's going to happen. 60-year-old and 70-year-old cars will not be rolling down the street if it became socialist. Like, you have to remember that even if the system changes, the circumstances don't necessarily change with them. Billionaires are not going to suddenly be standing in bread lines. People don't know what they don't know, as the old saying goes. So socialism is scary to Americans, especially poor Americans of all people, right? The quote unquote rich elites are not the ones that are most afraid of it, because they know they'd survive no matter what, right? Because rich elites almost always find a way to survive. It's poor people who are terrified of socialists. People who are working 3 jobs. They work at the Dollar General and they're driving for Uber Eats and they do security overnight. These are the people, ironically, who are terrified of socialism. But once again, it's because of the information or lack thereof that's been fed to them.
I don't know, Bill. You sound like you might be a little racist toward Jamaicans there. 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs.
Well, sadly, it has nothing to Jamaica. It has to do with people who make between $8 and $11 an hour, and their jobs won't allow them to accrue enough hours to get benefits. That's what I'm commenting on. That as soon as you get around that 20-something hour range, close to 30 hours, it's like, gotta cut you off. You're too close to getting benefits.
That's right. I've seen that happen out here. Being a member, a steward actually of the Food Workers Union. Natalie, what do you think about that? The involvement of young people and why older generations seem to be so terrified of that, when I think it's what should be happening.
You mean as far as their voice goes?
As far as their voice, I mean, it's not like the hippies in 1968, which is a whole different conversation when you want to start talking about fake news and things like that. But that's my own graveyard there. But what do you think about that? I mean, usually the parents, the parents are usually the trailblazers. Now it seems to be that the kids are the trailblazers.
Yeah. I think that the fear comes for in a lot of in a lot of areas. One of them is because they're so tech savvy and they have mass communication with each other, and they get these movements that involve hundreds of thousands of people really fast, like overnight. And I think that's scary to a lot of people when they want to make a point or make a stand. I've seen it in my own house. Giovanna and Juliana could probably give examples of that, but um, just an example of one tiny little, I don't know if it's tiny, but one incident when, Trump was going to go speak in a stadium, and he was told it was full because all the reservations had been taken up. Well, they've been taken up by this younger generation, and he shows up. He actually had stands put up on the outside of the stadium for the overflow, right? And then he showed up and the stadium's empty because none of those kids were going to show up. They were just trying to take those spots and not fill them. So he
I had
quickly
7 of
tried.
those spots, by the way. Just saying.
Yeah. So, that happened so quietly. I had no idea that was happening until it was happening because my generation's just not, we're just not doing that. I'm not on TikTok watching those videos. And Juliana kind of did a little experiment with my TikTok. I'm on TikTok just because my kids are on TikTok and I like to stay up to date on what's going on. But my algorithm is so different. My algorithm shows me, pranks and old ladies making food and blah, blah, blah. Juliana got on there and spent a few minutes trying to change my algorithm to something that was more like hers, which had bombings in the Middle East and some really big, dark things that were going on that weren't showing up on mine. So she tried. I think we spent like 20 minutes or something doing that. And then within 30 minutes, it was back to my old algorithm. So I think we're just unaware. And then these big things happen, like the Trump merchandise. That was another really big movement where the kids had figured out how to jam the Trump merchandise system by buying, $20,000 worth of merchandise, and then right at the checkout, they bail. And that would jam up. You guys can explain it better than I can, but my point is that they have a lot of power when they get together on this movement, and you can't control it. It's like a mass movement, and that is, I think, scary to a lot of people. As far as being the mom of kids that are doing this, I brought my girls to the Women's March, the day after Trump was sworn in, thinking, yeah, we're gonna have a voice, we're gonna speak up, and you don't get hurt if you don't speak up. We went to LA with 1 million women and spoke up, and it's just kind of been a snowball ever since, especially with Juliana. And Jovan has jumped on board, and they've just always stuck up for, whatever is moving them at the moment. And then Trump came, and he, obviously we saw what happened. So I guess my opinion on that is that that's what's scary is we don't have access. I don't feel like I have access. I have to dig hard to find what they're doing. My kids will tell me about it, but what about all those people that don't have kids that don't know about it? They just hear about it on the news. So, but that influenced a lot of things. They've been able to influence things without us having access to it. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. We just hope they're doing it the right direction.
The quiet part, uh, being part of Bill, I guess we can both attest to the quietness of dark ops. So, and this is kind of what this seems like, but on an intelligence level rather than a combative level. But Giovanna or Julian, how does this translate to votes and getting the people my age the hell out of there so that we can have a reasonable discussion among reasonable people?
Yeah, I think that One of the issues within, I guess, the overall quietness of our communication as a generation is exactly what you were saying. How the older generations don't have access to that, and so a lot of the time, a lot of the information is kept within the isolated bubbles. You know, like whoever can access that um, in our generation gets access to information, and that excludes a lot of people. So on one side, that can be a good thing. We can spread mass knowledge without having any influence from the outside, you know, like directing our attention in certain ways. But that can also backfire if we're keeping out opinions of other people and getting a better idea of sort of, you know, what we should be looking out for. Um, and so the quietness in general of the group is, you know, it's got two sides. It's got a good side and a bad side, a closed off side, and a very like proliferation of information. Um, so I guess on the good side of that, if we can, you know, rally and create opinions and have conversation within our generation's um, platform of isolation, then we can, you know, like rally people and get people excited and educated um, to help, you know, get people to vote and get out there. So
Yeah, and it really worked, honestly. Like our generation really pulled through on this last election, especially if you compare it to this 2016 election. It was a really bad showing from Gen Z, and so this time around, I think it really had to do with just us rallying together on social media, TikTok and Twitter and stuff like that. And also on the whole bubble thing, I think if you take that scenario and compare it to the older generations, we are so much better. We are on a our bubbles are so widely spread compared to you know what it used to be. So we're definitely on the right track, especially with
But you have access to this thing called social media that we didn't. I mean, it's much easier for you to spread something on social media than it is for me to stand out here in San Diego with a sign saying vote for HR1.
definitely 100%. I don't blame you guys.
Yeah. But and another thing that it takes is you have to have a lot of patience and you have to be willing to search out things because I mean, a lot of things that I do on the internet or look up. I mean, like you said, I might be on a different algorithm. I've probably been thrown off Facebook at least 7 or 8 times. So you know, I kind of they do it so much now. I just take it as a badge of honor. But uh, Bill, they're talking about using intelligence. Using military tactics without being uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not subversive, uh, coercive. That's the word I want to look at because you don't really, like they said, they're kind of in a bubble and they spread this information over cells, kind of like the old Viet Cong type of situation. A cell here, a cell there. By the time you find a cell here, it's gone and another's popped up here. We kind of thought that was ancient in our times. Well, how do you think that social media has made those kind of tactics more effective now than they were back in the time that you or I were in the military?
Well, let me say this about that. Like from whether you want to go back to the days of, papyrus or jungle drums, whatever, human beings have always found ways to spread information in ways that might be conspiratorial or secret or clandestine. That's not anything new. The difference now, of course, is rapidity, right? I mean, the moment you think something, you can let a million people know that you think it. That's what's different, and that's obviously both a good and a bad thing. And once you understand, have mastery, have an idea of how to manipulate, people are talking about gaming algorithms, right, or shifting, right, so that certain people see and certain people don't see certain things, or it's more prominent or less prominent based on your understanding of how to make the system, sit up on its hind legs and bark. So having a mastery not only of organization, having a mastery not only of dissemination of information, having a mastery not only of, I mean, what you and I would call a psyops, right? I mean, people are running psyops, and they may not call them that, but these OANs and LISA things are basically psyops. And whether it be the Koch brothers or wherever it is that are, at the top of the food chain of these things, it comes down to people realizing that the math doesn't work anymore. The math, as some friends say, the math isn't mathing. This is going to stop being a country with a majority of one group of people. We're going to be a country of pluralities, like a lot of European countries. And that scares some people for reasons I guess we can get into if you want to. But the idea of not having a majority, right, where there's over 50% of some type of people, and it's all pluralities, right, where 40-something% this and 20-something% that and 17% this and 11% that. Some people find that terrifying for whatever reason, James. And when you add to that the sense that this thing that used to unite certain people, right, culture, ethnicity, certain beliefs and things like that, there are people who believe that certain things are corrosive or chip away at that simply because it isn't conforming to what they thought it should look like, right? They are, the term you often hear used in psychology, they are functionally fixed around certain archetypes. And anything that doesn't fit into that terrifies them, right? They are inflexible, pick a term. And unless and until the people who are running these psyops and so scared, I mean, they are scared of this new world. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, man. They are scared of this new world, how this world will look, how it will feel, how it will function. They're going to fight it tooth and claw and, push back in every way they can. And we have to be prepared, one, to recognize that's what they're doing and be able to counter it. And that's why having young people and older people all integrated around understanding what's happening and why it's happening is going to help us to prevail.
Natalie, one of the things that I heard on one of the conservative rooms was that the reason why racism is so touchy now is that because the history that we teach is only about 60 years old. In other words, they're talking about from the Civil Rights Act on. They're talking about actually about 53 years, something like that. But the question was, is that the reason why this is such a touchy subject now is because the wound is still fresh, and that in the future, say 100, within another century or so, we won't even be thinking about the John Lewis Act or civil rights because that'll be a thing of the past. So my question was, if you're going to stop teaching civil rights, are you going to stop teaching about the discovery of America? Was that a valid question?
I think that there's definitely an issue with that. And my kids have brought it to my attention many times. They do learn about early America. They just aren't learning it. They're only learning it in a certain perspective, the white man's perspective. So it's not that they're not learning about it. They just need to make it more real and more honest. And, um, you know, there is a cutoff, though. I think history goes up to a certain point, and the civil rights maybe that point. I'm not exactly sure in the classroom. Um, what I see is that because we are so in touch with each other across the country with social media, I just feel like that is one of the main reasons why people are angry, because we do get in our little comfort zone where we don't see what is exactly happening in Georgia or whatever. And then when we see these things, we're just shocked. And it's kind of brought an uproar because it's all over the face now. It's been happening. I went to Florida in the 90s and I was shocked. It was like stepping back in time for me. I was in Central Florida and I born, raised in Southern California. I was really shocked. But I was physically there and saw it firsthand. I saw the KKK people in the hats and stuff. And I think what we see right now is people are getting in their little comfort and don't realize that stuff is still going on. And those people are still out there thinking that way. And they're being brought to the front. And that's why there's such an uproar, because we need to squelch it. We see this as a problem. It's always been a problem, but it's easy to be quiet when you're in your own, fast lane, going through school and work and just life, to ignore what's happening over there. And I think we can't ignore it anymore. It's in our face. So as far as like teaching history goes, absolutely we need to make it more honest and more complete. There's so much to learn. They have stretched it out over several years in school. They do part of it one year, part of it the next year, part of it the next year. So I don't know who exactly is saying that. Obviously Republicans, right? You're saying you were in a Republican group that was saying that?
Conservatives, yes.
Conservatives. Yeah.
I,
I mean,
I
there's a
think
lot
an,
of change that needs to happen.
yeah, I think a good point that you brought up is that we don't really see that things are happening all the time, but there are things that are still happening that is, like you said, James, since the history is so close to, what's happening around us, and we don't see that, it becomes a problem. And especially in school, when they frame it in a way, when they frame history in a way that makes us separate the timeline and stratify it so that we're separating it in our minds as some sort of like far away 100-year away event. It's frustrating when you like finally open your eyes and see that these problems are still happening around us. And I think that's part of the reason why right now critical race theory is such a controversial topic, because it's like hitting a nerve of reality that we're not being taught in school, and that the history is being manipulated to separate it, to have us separate all the bad stuff in our mind from what's actually happening, what's still happening, I should say.
Well, I'm not saying that, you should tell a first grader, the true history of Thanksgiving. Nor am I saying that you should teach a sixth grader the true history behind Custer's Last Stand. But Javon, were you ever taught in school about the Trail of Tears? Were you ever taught about the Tulsa Massacre? I mean, I'm sure you were taught about the signing of the Declaration of Independence and Ben Franklin's travels over to France, and you know.
I was, well, okay, so I had one teacher who was actually black himself, and he did teach us some stuff. He did teach us about the Tulsa race riots or whatever. That's what they called them, but that wasn't what it was. But he taught us about it, but it was kind of ridiculous because we had to. My mom had to sign a whole bunch of papers for it. That's how controversial it was to our school, which is pretty ridiculous because it's just history. But other than that one teacher, my junior year, I was not told the truth. Like I was not even close, dude. I was not told the truth, and I wasn't told the full story. of everything, and it was really upsetting, especially as an adult, and all this stuff is coming out. My eyes were wide open, and I got to see all these things firsthand. Again, back to the whole social media thing, like it's all over social media. I was not taught any of this, and so it is really frustrating, to be honest, thinking back on it. And I think it definitely needs to be changed. Like, I wouldn't want my kids to not be told the truth just like me, and then be angry when they become adults and figure everything out. So to your question, for the most part, no. I had one teacher that really, really fought for us to learn the reality of some of the things that happen, but one teacher is not enough. All the history teachers need to be teaching us the truth, and that's just how it is.
Bill, you're a parent also. Your thoughts on that conservative view of history?
Yeah. So I had the blessing and curse of being the son of an educator and having grown up with parents that have been very politically involved, and growing up in a state. I was born in Philadelphia, but I actually grew up in Virginia, North Carolina. So I grew up in the American South. And in Virginia particularly, Virginia was extremely proud of its history. You cannot graduate, at least, I don't know if things have changed, but at least at the time that I was in school, you could not graduate from high school in the state of Virginia with your high school diploma without passing Virginia history. That's how serious Virginia was about its history, that Virginia history was a required subject. So I remember, learning all about the House of Burgesses and learning all about the FFVs, right, which stands for First Families of Virginia. This is probably not something that people in other states even talk about. Who were the first families of the state of California, or the first families of the state of Ohio, or the first families of the state of Florida? I'm getting the feeling this is a Virginia thing. I've never had other people, I don't know, maybe Massachusetts might be down for that too, but I've never had someone else who's not from Virginia say, oh yeah, we studied that too. We know about Virginia Dare, the first child, meaning white child, born in the New World, and all this other stuff. These were things that were driven home to you. History was extremely important to the state of Virginia. It was and is, as far as I know. Very important to the state of Virginia. However, it's a history that was always very carefully couched, I think is how I would describe it. And while they did not avoid mentioning slavery, they also did not delve deeply into how influential slavery is and was in the history of America. How it allowed America to go from being, a bunch of the third sons of minor nobles, debtors, ne'er-do-wells, and criminals, to a world power in under 100 years, entirely, not entirely, but largely because of the infusion of power into the economic dynamo by having 4 million unpaid workers that you could trade and sell. And they didn't talk that much about how literal wedding gifts were given of slaves, and how the Bible was edited before it was, slave ministers were allowed to deliver it to their flock. And in many cases, they would literally be told what to say, because Virginia, like in other states, it was a crime in the state of Virginia to teach a slave to read. And people talk a lot about gun control. A lot of people don't mention that the first, even before the United States was a nation, back in the days of the colonies, the first gun control laws in the quote-unquote New World were part of what's called the Black Codes, where even free blacks were not allowed to own firearms. And I'm talking about 1760s, 1750s, long before this is even a nation. So when people say, critical race theory and this, that, and the other thing, they're acting like there's going to be all this extra teaching of. So we haven't gotten it's like saying I want extra credit when you haven't done your homework yet. We haven't gotten to the point. Forget worrying about critical race theory. We haven't even gotten to the point where we teach history reasonably well in this country. I went to a state where they teach history better than most places, apparently, when I talked to friends from other parts of the country. I had a better history education in high school than most. And my history education wasn't good, but thank God I had parents that made me read books and surrounded me with books. So I didn't have the excuse that some people have of saying I didn't know. I was made to know. And, even though I was an English and drama major, I had a minor in both mass communications and history, or I guess, yeah, mass communications and history. And by the time I got to my graduate school program, even though once again it's a theater-based program, it's on the dramaturgy side, meaning it deals with dramatic literature, history, theory, and criticism. In order to understand theater history, you have to understand history, right? You can't not know if you're studying, why there was a riot when a certain play was given by the African Grove Theater, is because no one wanted to see black people perform Shakespeare, and there was literal riots because the very effrontery of these benighted souls, these sables performing Shakespeare, right? If you don't understand race and racism when you're studying American history, then everything you learn is going to be incomplete and stilted and tilted and slanted. So unless you understand the role of race and what racism, and white supremacy have meant in the history of this nation, then no matter what you think you've studied, you don't really understand history.
Natalie, another thing that I wanted to touch on, and I think you brought it up momentarily in another show. Um, when you are a Caucasian woman raising mixed kids, I know you said that you exerted a certain influence, but only by your appearance, not by talking to someone or having a conversation. So when I hear someone tell me that they don't see color, what's your opinion of that?
Um, I know this is pretty controversial, but my husband was a very dark man, and very shortly after being with him, I didn't see that he was a dark man. I just didn't. You see the person, you see the. So I think, we all have, I think our brains are just wired to assess, when we go into any situation, we're assessing the situation. That's not conscious. I think that's a programmed unconscious thing. But as far as like seeing color, I don't see my kids' color. I don't see that. When they bring friends over, my youngest daughter has a pretty diverse group of friends. I don't see their color when I see them. I see this girl's giggly and this girl's, mom did that in the PTA. So
But
as
but
a white woman,
no, we're talking about the educational system here in particular because you were telling me about a conversation
yeah,
that you
okay,
had with a teacher, and until she saw you, the
right.
outcome. So once again, and as you said, she was a minority herself, I believe.
Actually, she was the vice president of the school. Yeah. So I guess what I would say is that indeed, I think certain people are very open. They don't probably see that way. I don't feel like I see that way. But there are certainly people that do see that way, that have stereotyped to my kids, for sure. I mean, and I really don't think they do it, but they clearly do it in their actions, and I really think it's so programmed into them. And sometimes they, maybe they do consciously do it. I actually, the vice president, I feel like that was very conscious. Juliana, we're talking about the woman who dress coded you for wearing the SpongeBob bandana. Um, to me, she definitely was racist. There's no getting around that. So you have an administration with, you know, however many people, 100 people. there are going to be people like that. There just are. You know, I can't say I can't speak for all of them, but I do know we had a lot of really good ones that did seem like they were just okay. You know, they were fine. I don't know what was going on in their mind, but they
Yeah, it was
seemed
just.
to be treated fairly. But
I was just gonna say it was a lot different when we went to a more diverse school with a more diverse staff, because that school that happened at was primarily white and it was in a very suburban, privileged area. So when we went to high school, I mean, one of our counselors was a black woman, and she was always advocating for us no matter what. You know, she still does with my little sister. You know, and I think it really just has to do with the diversity and the attitude of the staff per se.
yeah, there were
Just the thing.
people at our high school that were still racist. I had the same experience at high school as I had in the middle school, but I think I'm pretty protective of my kids about it because I didn't think it was necessary for them to know that. You know, I didn't want to load them up with the burden of walking around not trusting people. It didn't seem necessary to me. And I want to get past it. I want my kids to, you know, push through. They don't see it. I don't believe they see it that way now, but that was my intention at the time. So when things happened, Javon, one of your, in your episode, she was one of the ones that I had to contend with for 4 years. And he had a football coach that I believe was pretty racist as well. But then he also had football coaches that weren't. So, you know, as a mom, I felt like it was my job to kind of protect them from that stuff, shield them, because I don't want them to walk around with the burden of that, of this person over here. I'd rather them benefit from all of these other people who are pushing for them and supporting them over here. So it's kind of a fine line. But I don't know if that answers your question or not, James. There certainly are people that are immediately assessing in a judgy, racist way, for sure, you know.
Well,
And we are in
see,
Southern California, so you would, you know, it's shocking. It's shocking. And I didn't really know that was a thing until I had kids. And I saw it firsthand. And a lot of my friends don't think it's a thing. My white mom friends, they don't think it's a thing. And then I'll mention it to them and they'll be like, what? It's a thing. It's happening, you know? We just have to chip it down every time it comes up. You got to just chip away at it and call them out. I always call them out. I never let anything slide like that. I write letters. I have meetings. I call them out. It's not okay.
see, coming from a much different generation, in 1972, probably through 1978, you know, we had, you know, the big afros and, you know, the black pride thing and all, you know, so when you told me that you didn't see color, I took it as an insult because that meant that you didn't see me and recognize who I am. So, Javon, how has that perception changed, especially with men of color as yourself, but yet you are biracial? You know, I mean, back in my day, you know, we even had the thing between light skin and dark skin. So I mean, you
Yeah.
know,
Well, we
so
still do. That's
I
fine.
mean, yeah, I was gonna say it's still a thing. It's still a thing, but yeah, that's a really interesting question because this is one of the things that I think us kids argue with our mom with. Because in theory, if everyone had that loving mentality of we don't see color, then I think it would be okay. But that's just not the reality, and the fact that we were raised to think that, and then we kind of grew up and realized that that's not the case, and we need to embrace who we are. And you know, it was just kind of it backfired for you. Not to take a shot at you, mom, but it kind of did in a way.
No, I
Um,
didn't want anybody to deny color. That was never my intention. My intention was to be your unique self in the color that you are. Just to be who you are.
yeah,
And
but it didn't
wear it
help
with
us in the
pride.
long run. I mean, it didn't. In the long run, it didn't help
Sorry.
us out. But like I
I
said, in theory,
apologize.
if everyone was as loving as that, then I think it would be okay. But it's just not the reality of the situation. But back to the whole light skin versus dark skin thing, it's definitely a thing. But for me, it was more like a playful thing, and sometimes it was a little bit of like a bullying thing, but nothing that deeply scarred me. You know, my friends would think I'm soft because, oh, I'm light skinned. I close the refrigerator with my hips, type of thing. Like, no, that's it was always like very playful. So there was a couple times though. I will say there's a couple times where my friends or people that even weren't my friends, black people were like, "Yo, you can't say things like that. You're only light skinned. You're not even," or they'd say, "You're not even black." They'd say that,
Yeah.
and that was a little bit like not okay to me. But but yeah, overall, I think I was. I will say that I kind of grew up the same way, not seeing race, not seeing color. But in the end, like that was definitely damaging, and I see that that's not the reality of the social world that we live in right now, and that definitely became more apparent as I've grown up. So.
I also have a quick little comment on that because, like you said, Javon, in theory, I mean, if everybody believed that, then that like color isn't a thing, then our subconscious would also think that in theory. But the reality is that there are people who I would actually argue that every single person has a bias of some sort when it comes to racial interactions. But because there are people in this world who we have to interact with those bias, if we aren't taught the boundaries of those people's experience, we have no tools to understand our own experience and how we are being perceived by others. And so growing up, it was tough because I was taught that race isn't like shouldn't be a big deal, but I was having all these experiences that I had no idea how to break down, how to process, like nowhere to relate it down to. And I think that if I had been taught that this is how some things are, and this is how some people are going to act, and people have these specific bias, I would have a better understanding of where other people are coming from and how to interact with that myself. And so I do think that it is important to teach kids, like this world is full of bias, and we have to understand how to interact with that and heal that. It's not always about breaking down. Like there is a healing aspect to it, but in order to heal, we have to understand, which kind of also goes along with the education part. If we don't understand what's happening, then how are we going to fix anything?
Yeah. I also want to say real quick that I don't blame you for raising us the way that you did, by the way, Mom. Like I'm not trying to take a shot at any of that. I understand where you were coming from 100%. I don't think you had like negative intentions. It was just kind of like, something you didn't understand. We didn't even understand until we were older. So.
Well, now,
with another person, the other person, the intention was we would balance each other. The other person that was with me, your father, he was a part of that. And I never assumed the role of trying to teach you what it's like, because it wouldn't be genuine, because I don't know what it's like, so I feel a little lost at how I could have done that differently. Obviously we can always think about, what can we do differently if we look back, but I appreciate you saying that, Javon.
now, another thing that I've kind of heard from Gen Z, right? That would be you guys, Gen Z. Is that my generation didn't prepare your mother and Bill's generation for the things that were going to be coming on them. In other words, after 1964, we stopped being culturally responsible and assumed that because of the Equal Opportunities Act and so forth and so on, that we would be included, or as you guys call it now, inclusion, that you would be automatically included in the mix because of the trials that my generation went through, the Huey Newtons, the Stokely Carmichaels, and so forth. So Bill, what was your thought on that? Did your father, even though you said he was an educator, did he prepare you for
Well, it's
a
funny.
world where you didn't see race?
Oh, heck no. So we were, well, James, we were blockbusters. We were the first black family in Hollywood Maple Halls. So my father used his GI Bill to, get a mortgage in an area where, I mean, we could have a whole long discussion about redlining, where they tried to get my parents to move, where my parents later decided to buy a house instead, and the repercussions. But even within my own family, so my both my parents are black, but my mother uh, looks very different from my father, my late father. So my mother, within her family lineage, has a lot of different stuff, and my father's side is like straight field hand. So it's so to put it in perspective, my mother's father looked like a more tanned version of Groucho Marx, right? The mustache and the wavy hair and everything. I'm not even kidding. And her great grandmother grew up on a reservation in what they used to call Indian country, in what later became the state of Oklahoma. Um, so uh, when they left slavery, that family, instead of going north like normal people or whatever, they went west. They were part of that like exoduster movement and things like that. So in the 1870s and 1880s, my mother's family was in like Fort Smith, Arkansas, what later became Oklahoma, and even all the way out to New Mexico. And some of them even made it apparently all the way out to California. They're doing a lot of family history research out there. Thanks, Mom. To try to figure out exactly where they all went after they got the hell out of the like Moss Point, Holly Springs, Mississippi area as fast as their little legs would carry them. But no, quite the opposite. There was some controversy, and once again, my parents sort of age appropriately let me know that there was some whispers apparently within some parts of my mother's family when my mother married my father, who was, I mean, he's not like midnight dark, but he was a little darker than me, but probably, classic chestnut brown. Um, and like I said, my mother was more of like my mother could pass the ever popular paper bag test they used to have back when she was in college, when she was pledging. So uh, so not only was I, not seeing color in terms of between different races, or once again, there are no different races, but we won't get into that. That's a societal thing, not a at all a genetic thing. But I understood that even within the whole, if you're brown, stick around, right? All that. If you're black, step back. If you're white, it's all right. That was, something I very much knew about. And I grew up in the South, once again, I'll remind people. So when we moved into that neighborhood, it's funny because I had to fight all these little white kids. Shout out to the Yop brothers and Donnie. What was Donnie? I fought every day. And then I had to fight black kids because I got bussed my white neighborhood to a black neighborhood because I talked white. So I was fighting everybody, James. There's 5 black kids I fought every day at school, from 4th, 5th, and then finally stopped in 6th grade for some reason. But 4th and 5th grade was hell because I was fighting, a bunch of little white kids, and I had to fight a bunch of little black kids every day.
Uh, Natalie, what was your experience? You married a black man, and surely you had to know, especially back in those days. I mean, I know it was 20 years later than mine, but even then, you had to know that there had to be certain obstacles that you were going to overcome, or that you were going to have to overcome. So I'll ask you: did your parents prepare you to be colorblind, and
Yeah.
how did you find that experience with the
Well,
real
yeah,
world?
I had a little bit of a unique childhood. My mom was a Christian Scientist
Oh,
and believed that this outer shell was really meaningless and it was really the spirit and soul that mattered. So everybody's shell looks different. but everybody's the same inside and propelled by levels of love. That's how I was raised. I also went to junior high school during busing in the 70s. And so in my school, we had black kids bus to our school. And I would learn things, little rhymes or whatever. And I would go home to my mom and, well, I learned this great rhyme. Today, we do the thing. And she would just say, oh, I've never heard that. That's interesting. And it was more like a celebrate the differences thing. My sister was one of the white kids bused down to their neighborhood. And my mom had to sign an agreement to let her do that. Just like their parents had to sign an agreement. And it was a little rougher experience for my sister. She, I mean, she was little, so she went in it with a open mind, completely open mind. But there were a couple situations where my mom was kind of going, I don't know if this was the right idea, because she never pulled her out and she never expressed it to me. But later in life, she told me a couple incidences. My school, we just didn't have fighting. It wasn't a thing. But in the elementary school, there was a lot of fighting. And so my mom was worried about that, just having that influence. But okay, so Christian Scientists, if you know anything about that, it's not Scientology, it's a completely different situation. They're very much in denial of anything negative. And so I was raised that way. We didn't go to doctors. Any kind of physical ailment, we just had to change our thinking metaphysically about it. So yeah, I was definitely groomed to be
Isn't that how
trained.
James Earl Jimmy Carter was raised, if I remember correctly?
I don't know about that. I've never heard that. He's very much a born again Christian now, though.
Yeah,
But I
right,
don't.
right. I think he was raised Christian
Mary
Scientist
Baker
because
Eddy. Yeah, Mary Baker Eddy was the founder. It's a very
yep.
new religion that's kind of dying off now. I kind of developed more into a religious scientist that encompasses all religions. We welcome all religions. I'm going to admit that, but my thinking is more of those lines of everybody's got the right idea as long as they're being good to their neighbors and loving everybody. So I was raised that way, and free to be you and me, Marlo Thomas.
I
That was a
remember
huge,
that.
yeah, and cold pricklies and warm fuzzies, and we were programmed to include and love everybody. It was the hippie time, the 70s. And so, yeah, that was my grooming for sure. And then when I married my husband, my thing about that, he came, okay, he was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. And of course,
Oh,
he experienced a lot of things, but he was kind of top of his game. He was a state champion wrestler and, I guess a big football star. And I didn't know him at that time. But so he was kind of revered. And I think that gave him a certain amount of confidence to move through life. And at the same time, he also had to deal with prejudice. But I think he got a little edge up on that. And he had fears in Florida. He used to worry about going out in public and stuff. And I would just be like, what are you talking about? We have the right to do whatever we want. I'm not going to change my behavior in my life because of somebody's prejudice.
So
That's their
real
problem.
quick, do you think that the way that you were raised prepared you for the way that his family treated you? Because his family was a little bit iffy about him dating a white woman, right?
Yeah. So my family welcomed him pretty easily, and also my mom and my grandparents, they lived around the world, so they were kind of worldly people. His family never left Charleston. His mom had never been on a flight before, and she didn't like me because I was white. She didn't know me, and I wasn't really offended. I was sad. I was sad that she had the pain inside of her to hate me because I was white, because I knew it was coming from a place of pain, right? It wasn't coming from anything I did because she didn't know me. So I didn't take it personally. I took it as sad. And I also wanted to, like, I thought over time, as she gets to know me and knows that I'm a good person that cares about her, maybe her opinion will change. And that's kind of what I've always wanted to do in life, is to set an example and try to make a change by being a kind, loving person to everybody. Now, he tried to protect me from his family that didn't like me because I was white. And I learned a lot more later. But yeah. the way my parents raised me definitely did prepare me for that. And like I said, what your opinion of me and my very dark husband is none of my business. That's your problem. You have a problem with us? Don't let it come into my space. That's your problem. And that's how I walked through life with him. He was a lot more sensitive, but really he was pretty strong. I mean, I think he was able to do that a little bit too. You know, every once in a while he would get frustrated and an incident would happen. And then we work through it. We're together. We're a team. We would talk, there's people out there like that. So,
I kind of went through a similar situation. My family was very accepting. It was her family that I had a problem with. And I was also very protective because I knew, I mean, back in my days, we called them wiggers. I don't know what you might call them this way, but, I had no intention of making her a white niggers, if you want to just put it politely. So I wanted her to make sure that she kept in touch with her family. As I said, my situation was a little different because my career was a little different. But I found that other people, when you let other people get into your business more or less, and they start making you have doubts about the problems that you're going to have with the other race or those other people, most of the time they don't have the courage to say it out loud. But later on, you find that there's an attitude toward your children or toward, maybe, before they went to school, you guys, hung out together or, had lunch together. But now that they're school age, and they might not see color, but all of a sudden there's a separation of households. Julianne, did you or Javon go through any of that as you grew older?
Can you clarify what you mean by separation of households? What does
Uh,
that look like?
I mean, like the white side and the black side. I know. I think your father's been gone for quite some time, but I mean, there's still elements, like where you had to find out about your own blackness, regardless of whether you were really light skinned or really dark skinned.
Mm-hmm. So there definitely wasn't any external pressures that I've felt personally, as far as separation goes. But that being said, like, I didn't really have access to my black side of my family, so I have no idea if that was, them subconsciously separating, or if that is like
No,
an
I
active
meant
thing.
I meant society and how like how society sees you, as a still, whether you're light or not, they still see you as a black woman.
Mm.
That's definitely 100% true. It, like I said, like there were some struggles for sure with darker people not seeing us as full black, but then white people see us as black. It kind of leaves us in like this black sheep position that definitely did suck. It still does. I mean, it's still a thing. I still get followed when I go to the store. So it's a thing. It definitely is.
Yeah, and it, it's deeper than just people saying it explicitly. Like it's the comment, "Oh, are you adopted? Because your mom is white." Like,
Love that
that's
one.
subconsciously.
that happened quite a few times. That happened. I was asked quite a few times if my kids were adopted.
That
And
used to
they
make
would
me
stand
really
right
insecure as
next
a
to
kid.
me. What's that?
I said that used to make me really insecure as a kid.
Yeah.
I
Because what
hated
is
being asked that.
that plants an image in your mind of a self-image of you being an isolated person. Like, you have nowhere to connect with if society isn't validating your one connection that everyone has the right to have, family.
Mhm.
So definitely societal pressure of
And it's funny
separation.
because I only felt that with my mom. Like, even though my dad was way darker, if we were in the same room, it was more believable that he was my father than my mom is my mom, which is like more proof right there that society still sees us as black, and it's very clear. So,
See, Bill, in the '90s, as Natalie was saying, or even '80s. See, I took that to mean that I was a strong black man and I was to be feared. I was the baddest, especially with my training. I was so and so on the planet. So how dare you think about approaching me with some type of nonsense as to who I slept with? So my generation, or at least I handled it much differently. So is that did at some point we allow our children, your generation, to become more submissive because we thought that was the right thing to do?
I don't know if it's generational. Uh, there's always been, I mean, you can go back to the days of Jack Johnson. You can go back to, I mean, how far back do you want to go? Where, and of course, he was a very dark man who was 6'1.5" and 200, at his very lightest, once he became champion, 212 pounds, but most of the time, more like 220 or around that range, with a gold tooth right here, and Savile Road suits and Duesenberg customized roasters and white women on each arm. So, and then you had people, who like Jesse, um, Owens, who was, you know, quiet and humble and, married to his high school sweetheart and, wouldn't, you know, I mean, other than his color, wouldn't be offensive to even the most virulent racist, other than the fact he's a black man, right? So there's always been this push and pull, and it's not just around black manhood; it's blackness, period. But America venerates, loves, hates, fears, eroticizes, fetishizes, isolates, attempts to destroy, envies, simultaneously all these things about black people and black culture. It's fascinating. Like, if America could be put on a couch and be made to talk to a therapist, like collectively, what a book that therapist could write. Uh, I remember reading Ebony Jr. because I had a subscription to Ebony Jr. magazine. Shout out to the Johnson Publication Company. And there would be these fascinating little articles basically about how to be like a successful little black person. Also, which get your butt kicked, So at one point, as a 7-year-old, I was carrying a briefcase. Do not recommend, and because it did not go well for me. Shout out to Kendall Hunter and Angelo Bolden and Angelo Sauls. And
that really wouldn't have went over good in the '50s, Bill.
it would have gone over at any time. You get beat up if you are a 7-year-old carrying a briefcase. So I'm just letting you know this now. Like that whole Young Sheldon thing, total fiction. Or at least it works for white kids. I don't know. But I was getting
it works for white kids either.
5 kids up the schoolyard every day because of this Dards briefcase. So there's always been this push to be respectable and clean and all these other things, right? This push to not reflect badly on your family, your race, your this, your that. And it's a pressure that it's impossible to explain to someone that hasn't had to fit into the mold, right? It's impossible to explain. Like, you can't explain what it's like to feel like having to explain to your coworkers about the O.J. Simpson situation or whatever it is. Like, all these things where you have to represent or explain or put in terms that your white friends and colleagues can relate to or understand what's going on with Black people. So whether you're dark or light, whether you're young or old, whether you are highly educated or illiterate or whatever it is, America is, like I said, equally fascinated and horrified by it, no matter what you do, right? Even if you're the quote unquote flavorless brother who pledges a white fraternity, only dates white girls, wears Sperry topsiders, like you do all that stuff. You do everything you're supposed to do. You join the Young Republicans. You've got a 4.0 GPA. I mean, go down the list. If your car breaks down in the wrong place, you might get shot, right? It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter. So some people decide, well, what the hell? I'm just going to go in this whole other direction. Some people decide I'm going to try to change things. Like there's lots of different ways you can react to it, but there's no escaping it, right? So even if you're, like I said, the 7-year-old kid carrying a briefcase, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your vocabulary is, what your GPA is, how much you earn. None of that really matters. And that's the thing that someone who is outside of the experience can never fully understand, never fully grasp, is that you're born in a trap. Now, it's not a trap that necessarily is going to kill you or even hurt you all the time, though it certainly can. But it's a trap that prevents you from changing the way certain people will ever see you, no matter what. You could literally be president of the United States, literally. And nonetheless, I saw memes of the president smoking in Newport, or with 4 parts in his head, or returning to his wife Michelle as Obama's baby mama. Right? This is a guy that was the president of the Harvard Law Review. Like, what more can a person do? It's harder to become president of the Harvard Law Review than it is to become president of the United States, because the people who vote for you are your competitors, right? Imagine if you had to become president by getting the votes of the people who are running against you in the primary. That's what I'm talking about. This is a person, I briefly worked for the man many years ago, so I know him reasonably well, who did everything, right, to make white America comfortable. And some white Americans came to love him. Like, I have white friends who love him more than I do, and I know the man personally and works for him. But there are some portions of America that didn't care about his policies, didn't care about his anythings. All he had to know was his name, right? They hadn't even seen him in some cases, right? And we had someone later become president because of lies they told about our previous president, right? That's what put them in politics. The person that had no interest in politics before and had no grounding, no knowledge even of politics, uses this one lie to catapult themselves into national politics. That's America in a nutshell.
But you see, when you start talking about Obama and you start talking about the blackness, for a long while, a lot of black men thought of other black men and black people that wanted to be assimilated. We called them Negroes. I don't know if you
sellouts or a whole bunch
right,
of other
right,
things.
yeah,
Yes, I remember.
yeah.
Been there.
So, Natalie, did you ever run into that in society? Maybe your husband was a sellout because he was dating you, or any type of that situation that you may have had earlier.
He got it before he met me, because he was a Republican, and his family, he spoke proper, and his mom would say, "He's speaking so proper." She would make fun of him for speaking proper, and I don't know where he got. I don't know why his whole family speaks one way and he doesn't, and speaks a different way. I don't think he meant. I don't think that was intentional. I mean, I don't know how that happens. He did. He was in the Air Force and he lived around the world as well. So maybe he had an accent. He didn't. He didn't think he ever had an accent. But they called him Uncle Tom. He just. I mean, I think I always thought he handled it with so much grace because he's kind of rose above it and just like, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're calling me an Uncle Tom for being educated and doing what I want to do in life because that's what he was doing. He wasn't trying to be a white person. He was just trying to do what he wanted to do, and people perceived it as being a white person. He actually went into law enforcement, and his family didn't think that was a good idea. And so, yeah, they called him an Uncle Tom. And I actually had never heard that term before I met him. And he, like I said, he handled it. He was just like, yeah, that's what they think, whatever. You know, I'm still going to do what I'm going to do, and they can think whatever they want. I mean,
Julian,
I don't know how people are supposed to respond to that. It's rude, it's ignorant, in my opinion, and I don't think there's really a place for it in a more educated conversation to me. So I guess you could say we ignored it. I don't know. I
Juliana,
think he handled it gracefully. Personally, I don't know how he could have handled it better.
Hold on, Mom. Hold on.
Go ahead.
Juliana, have you had any personal experiences or remembrances, maybe?
Um, Not any specifically. I mean, towards my, as far as my own experience goes, definitely, called the Oreo. That was a common one in high school. Um, Anything relating like a black and white mix was definitely a name that I was called a lot of the times. Um, and I don't think it's productive. I don't think name calling is productive in general. So yeah. I actually have to go to another meeting though. But
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for hosting this conversation. It's always a great time and makes us think a lot. And I love hearing everybody's experiences. So thank you so much.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
Julia.
Thank you. Do you have any social media that people can follow or anything like that?
I keep a pretty low profile, but I am an artist, so if you want
Mhm.
to go check out my art, you can always go on Instagram. It's called, I think, Juju's, JUJUS underscore got underscore art. Um, just a little thing, but yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, we need a logo for the sports crib. Maybe we'll check you out there. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, there you go. Hit me up.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks a
Have a
lot.
good night, everybody.
You too.
Bye, sweetie.
Yeah. Uh, let's go to that black man syndrome there, Julian. I'm sure that might be uh, rather harsh when I speak of it in those terms because what you're 40 years removed. But do you find that problem today where sometimes you have to use that stereotype or that fierceness against those that you know tend to think, as you say, because you're light skinned or you're mixed, that you might be weak.
So there was definitely a lot to prove as far as that went. In my generation, we're not called Uncle Tom; we're called Uncle Ruckus. Um, I'm sure you guys know that show.
Oh yes.
So I was called
Seen
Uncle
it
Ruckus all the
live.
time. I always thought it was a joke. Again, like in my friend group, it was all a joke. But there was some serious times when I had to put my foot down. There was a small little incident that I didn't really think much of as a kid, but as I got older, I was like, I really made the right decision when I said this. But we were talking about a hip hop album. I forgot what album it was, and I had listened to it. I loved hip hop, and I loved this album, and I was talking about it, and then some black kid just put his foot down. He was like, "Yo, you can't be saying anything about this album. You can't say nothing about it because you're light skinned." He basically said that, and I kind of went off on the kid and didn't think much of it. And then later down the road, I just thought about all the times I've had to do that, and I know it sounds silly, but like defend my blackness, it's definitely a thing. It's definitely real. So,
Um, Natalie, how did you feel during those times?
I didn't witness that. That was in his own private little group. But what I saw is a lot of little girls really liked Javon, and he had a girl following, And I think that there was, like you were saying, Bill, there's some kind of intrigue about being maybe with somebody of color, and Javon, I think he used the term pretty privileged sometimes.
Yeah.
It's he got free donuts the other day. I think he so that's what I saw. I saw the privileged side of his mixedness, and I didn't see a lot of the negative side. I like I said, I saw the stuff at school and I tried to nip that in the butt, but I see a lot of people wanting to be his friend, going out of their way to be his friend, maybe to have a black friend. I don't know if that's their intention or not. But what's your perspective on that, Javon? Javon's
I
been
mean,
he's
I'm not.
actually a pretty shy guy, so he didn't respond to all those girls that were saying hi,
There's definitely
Javon.
privilege. And I see what you're saying. There's definitely privilege, and I think that's where the divide comes with darker skinned men and light skinned men. Um, but I'm not drowning in privilege. There's still very major issues that I have to deal with as a black
Right?
man.
No, not
But if I
drowning.
go into a store, for example, I always say this: if I go into a store and I'm the only one in there with a darker skinned man, the employees are going to follow the darker skinned man over me. But if I'm in the store with the white man, they're going to follow me over the white man. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not drowning in privilege, but there's definitely some highs to being light skinned.
Yeah,
Not
I
going to
was
deny.
mostly referring to the friends group, Javon, and your peers at school.
Yeah, I mean, in my friend
It's
group, I
definitely
was definitely
different when
like
you
the
go
one who
into a
was being made
store.
fun of all the time, for being light skinned. I had a really very almost all black friend group for reference in high school. But I was the light skin of the group, so they were always roasting me. But it was all fun, at the time. I guess it was at the time I didn't see it as negative, but it was, it was, but friends are friends, I guess.
Well, what about one of my best friends is black. Did you ever want to run into that situation?
Oh man, I hate hearing that sentence. I hate it. You can't say that as a rebuttal for something to justify some racist thing that you just said or did, or some racist ideal that you have. I heard that a lot, and I was also the black friend. I'm sure you guys were too. I was the black friend that people said that about, and it's frustrating. It's a very common thing too. I don't know. I mean, was it a thing at your age? Were white folks saying that, to
Of,
make themselves?
of course, yeah. I mean,
So it's very
especially,
outdated.
especially if you had anything to do with sports, because if you had any kind of physical ability and you were on a team, you know, sometimes you may have been the token. On the volleyball team, for instance, but football and basketball were good, but you needed that third letter for your jacket. So Bill, you probably understand what I'm talking about.
Well, my best sport was wrestling, and there were a couple other black guys on the team, but it was clearly a sport that they. I'll put it this way: the joking around in the locker room for football players and basketball players was different, right? So already wrestlers are more highly attuned because there's always like a little snickering about us. There's like, oh, you're in there with a bunch of sweaty guys grabbing each other, huh? So you're already like ready to go, right? Because there's always people taking little shots at you being a wrestler anyway.
And
And
you
then,
got them little tights on, I mean, come on.
yeah, I've heard it all. You can't hurt me anymore. I've heard it all. But but yeah, you already are tuned, right? Because stuff is coming, and there were things that like the white dudes on the team would do. Like there was one guy on the team that would eat literally anything. And I wish shout out to you, Neil, wherever you are. And I'm not even joking when I say that. Like he ate cockroach once. Like he would eat anything. I'm not joking, not a joke. It was Iron Gut. And so and so there's this thing, like, once again, don't get me wrong, like, people are people, I get it, all that, but there's things that I've seen white people do that no black person I've ever known said, oh yeah, I'll do that, right? And maybe there's a black person out there that would. I haven't met them, is what I should say. But I've met multiple white people, both in my time as an athlete in school and then later in my time in the Army, where I'd see white dudes do things, it's like, what? Right? And part of it's because the cost is different, right? Where this thing you do is like, cool, you did this crazy thing that no sane person would ever do. It doesn't cost you the same way if you're a black person who does this thing, this insane, crazy, horrible, disgusting thing that no one should ever do. There's no like, oh yeah, that's horrific. You know, I mean, like, there are some things that are just different, right? That is different. When I saw that dude like catch and eat a cockroach, I was like, yeah, okay. Like, we can still be friends, but not too close.
You
There's
can't drink out the same bottle. No.
no. I'm not so sure I want to, like, warm up with you even. But like, when you're wrestling anyway, right? You've already decided a certain amount of humiliation I've bought into, right? I'm okay with that. But there's levels to it, as the kids say. So there were times when, weird stuff goes on in locker rooms with teenage boys anyway, because they're weirdos and full of hormones and smell bad all the time and all the stuff, right? And you add to that, you're a wrestler. You're starving. You're living on 800 calories a day. You're running 2.5 hours before school. You go to classes. You have 2.5 hours or whatever hours of wrestling, practice. Then you run another 2 or 3 hours. You're wearing plastic bags underneath your clothes. You're living like a person who is in a cult, basically. And when you add to that, anyone else here wrestle? Anyone else? Just me? No? Okay.
No, but I saw them. They're crazy.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. Okay.
I wrestled for 1 year at Newcastle High. But
okay. Oh, I know where Newcastle High is. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you're already in sort of this odd little, like I said, almost cult-like group. And so that helped us to cross some of the divides between like races. But there were places where like the black guys would say, nope, you guys, that's you. Like, you guys enjoy that weird stuff you're going to do over there. When you're done, we can be friends again, right? There was these little moments where we'd just be like, nope, we're not doing that. There's an episode of a show called Dave I saw recently. I don't know if anybody else just watched it, but Dave Berg, aka Little Dicky, has a fascinating show, and it's obviously semi-autobiographical about being this, this little Jewish guy in the world of hip hop. And he's a very, smart, funny, but very odd person. I think I feel safe saying he's an odd dude. And he has another friend who is also a very odd dude. And there's a recent episode where the two very odd little, Jewish guys, one is a producer and one's Dave, aka Little Dicky the rapper, are doing all kinds of stuff. And they're explaining, like, it's not gay. We're just doing this weird stuff. And the two black friends that are over there at the same house, this is what I'm talking about. You should check this.
I think I've seen the video. Yeah, I love Lil Dicky. He's funny.
Right. Okay. This episut you would very much enjoy. They're like, no, we're not like anti you doing that, but we can't do that. like we're fine with you doing it, but understand we can't partake.
Yeah.
And it's like, name a black bromance film, right? And you start trying to name films, and it's like, well, no, that's not really a bromance, because like that's an actual romance. Those guys are actually in love. That's different. But they were talking about like the equivalent of some of those like mismatched buddy films. It's never two black guys. Like even Bad Boys, it's not really a bromance. It's probably as close as you can get, right? It's probably as close as you can come to a black bromance film, because there's such a high social cost to black men being seen as a little off, right?
I do not think that there is a market for a black Brokeback Mountain. It's just me.
Well, once again,
that's just me. That's why I said that. It's just me.
Oh, okay. I mean, there was Once One Lane. It was a beautiful. I mean, it was different. Obviously, it was a beautifully made film, and Mahershala Ali's work is Oscar level work. So it has happened, but it's presented differently, right? I mean, obviously, it's not two guys driving pickup trucks, but it's clearly it works in the same territory, but does it in a different way. There have been films that have done that, but it's just differently. It has to be done differently because even within that film, the black men in it, right, had to always be careful about how they present publicly because you never know when you have to literally fight for your life. So it's a little different because of that.
Natalie, I want to thank you for taking the time out to be with us tonight. You and the rest of the family. I'll get to Javon, but you want to give us your final thoughts for the evening, and thank you so much again, once again, for your time and for your wonderful family.
Thank you so much, James. I have so many thoughts, but I'll just thank you for having it on. I think it's like I said before, such a good forum to get perspective. And I really wish that, so part of the whole younger generation talking online, what I would love to see is more of this. I want them to communicate with different generations. And that is why I really like your show. And I think they would get farther and get their word out farther if they could hook in the other generations with them. So thank you for having this forum. Thank you for having me on, and I appreciate it. And thank you, Javon. See you soon. And Bill, it's so interesting to listen to you, Bill. You're full of information.
Thank you.
And I'm really surprised you knew Free to Be You and Me, but that's delightful.
Oh, I remember it all too. I still know the song, so I will not sing them because I have a terrible voice. But I remember
know the songs too because I have the
yeah, I remember that came out around the same time as The Point. Remember The Point? Me and My Arrow going up the Narrows. Okay, so there was a whole bunch of stuff around that time, and obviously when you grow up also on like Mr. Rogers and Electric Company and
great.
Sesame Street and Zoom, which is my favorite actually of them all. Because
I used to watch Zoom. I remember.
well, my first published work was read on Zoom. I still remember the post office box 350 Boston Mass 42130. Send it to Zoom.
See, that's why we don't let Bill sing on the sports.
No, you should never let him. It's like don't get your gremlins wet. But
thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
And I look forward to talking with you again.
Right. Thank you.
Javon, it's the second time we've had you on the show. We're joined now by the chairman of the Black Panthers here in San Diego, Brother Robert Ward Williams. You guys are welcome to stay on with the conversation, or you can give me your last words, and I'll see you at the next time. Javon, we need to hook up a little bit here. I need to get in that little circle, man, and I have some projects like for giving water up to Flint, Michigan, voter drive for Atlanta. I have some ideas I'd like to run past you and that younger generation of yours.
Okay, definitely.
But do you have any final thoughts, or you want to hang out here with me and Brother Williams?
I won't talk too much because I know I'm going into the Black Panthers time. But just thank you. I love being a younger generation person, and just communicating with y'all. I think it's really cool. I love doing things like this. So thank you so much. And Bill, you're a really cool dude. I liked hearing all the stuff you talked about. We grew up on opposite sides of the country, so it's really cool to hear it all. But again, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it. I think I'm going to head out.
Thank you, Javon. You have a great night, man.
You too.
So, Bill, you want to hang out with us, or you know,
where would I go if I weren't here, right? We're doing this.
So, Brother Williams, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Another day on the battlefield.
I don't know if you had anything specifically that you wanted to talk about, but the last subject that I kind of broached was uh, between the different ways that we handled blackness in the 60s and 70s and the way it is handled now. And I think, as I was saying, uh, in my generation, blackness was a badge of honor. We relished our blackness. When you go back to some of the organizations, such as the early Panthers and some of the other so-called militant organizations, I mean, we actually flaunted our blackness, the afros, the way we dressed, our music, and it,
Handshake.
right, and it was when somebody told you that they didn't see color, it was an insult because that means that you didn't see me, you didn't see who I am.
Right.
Now the first thing I hear is I don't see color, or my best friends are black.
Well, let me speak on that a little bit. So even like in my generation, what I grew up, I want to say like I'm like a late '80s, early '90s child in terms of my childhood, and so I grew up, with the rise of Public Enemy. I went to Public Enemy concerts. Paris, who was an artist, and
Paris.
yeah, and
You're
like
the
the
Panther.
yes, that's what actually one of the things that inspired me to get involved in the Panther Party. So you had these kind of things coming up at that point in time, and so from that standpoint, what we experienced as well as what you experienced in your time was the deal that we were re-identifying with Black culture. And I think what has happened, and we haven't, I don't think we've had that trend yet come back around. And so what I think has happened is the whole idea of how the Black youth are seeing themselves now, especially as it goes into that aspect that you said, I don't see color. It means a different thing to them, because when you say that to my generation, your generation, that basically means I don't see your culture. I don't see color. I don't see your culture. That's how I would interpret it. Oh, you don't see my culture. You don't see that all of the richness of what Africans bring to the table. Whereas now, because of the lack of connection with the blackness and in terms of identity, when the youth say that now, it's almost as if they look at it, or it's used to me as a scapegoat to be able to try to be shunned away from being part of the what I refer to as a white privilege system, or someone who is not taking direct action to be a blunt racist or bigot. So their whole thing would be, well, I don't see that. So it's almost like saying I look at the individual for who they are first. And psychologically, I just feel like, even when people say that, for the most part, is still because they're not probably dealing with an environment to where there's a good percentage of us. So we may be like, for instance, here in San Diego, I can see that being, that staying, you can get away with that all day long here. But I would say if you were to grow up in Atlanta, and you have a white person in the middle of a black mall say, I don't see color, I think they would get an entirely different look. What do you say, Bill? You know, um, and that's just because of the dynamics of the people you're around. And I would say it goes into being a minority in an environment. When you're the minority in an environment, you want to have a one-on-one relationship with the person saying that, so to speak. So they kind of automatically are in a position of power just in their environment by saying that, and then they more or less saying trying to give you a direct compliment, which is supposed to take your guard down from being able to look at it any other way. And in doing so, all of a sudden now you're being the racist. So it's just a different age and time, especially as it applies to certain dynamics of where you at. Just like your guest that you just had on in regards to even feeling like being light skinned has its benefits. To me, I'm a little bit of a light skin, but where I grew up, I didn't have benefits from it because I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. So there wasn't any real benefits. Every now and then I would say there's a time that came around where women, the girls were more
We all
attracted to light
remember.
skin.
We all
Yeah.
remember when the barges came out.
Yeah, so it's like off and on, we became the end thing as far as a relationship goes. But I always had to prove myself just because of my lighter skin amongst other black males.
Right.
And so I never grew up feeling like it was ever a privilege. And not until I got into an environment to where blacks was not the minority in my neighborhood or in my area did I start seeing how different that was. And so it was, it just really depends on where you grow up within the United States under that notion, as well as how close you are removed from your likeness. So for instance, neither one of my parents or my grandparents are light skinned as me. And I would say it's way down the line to where I'm sure there was some European blood in my generation. In my family line, I just so happen to be light skinned, and a few of my cousins. But my mother's darker than me. My father was darker than me. My grandmother is like your color, James. But I'm sorry, on my mom's side. Now my grandmother on my dad's side, she's super light, but then all her children were dark. So it's just one of those things where it just kind of played around, and family wise we did not benefit from it. We tend not to prove ourselves, and I even see that within the black is that a lot of the light skinned people tend to have to push themselves to be more articulate simply because they light skinned, and so they're gonna be challenged first. I see that a lot. It's almost like, well, just because you light skinned, they're gonna come at me sideways, so I got to be prepared for it. So just being light skinned tend to make you, if you're in the movement, sometimes it just tend to make you brush up on your education a little bit better and be more sharp at debating, because you're gonna have to, you're gonna get challenged, and you're gonna get checked. And so from that standpoint, I dealt with that.
Another thing that while we were talking about critical race theory and culturally reformed teaching, I was thinking back about the Constitution, and I was thinking about some of the things later on that were passed in states like Louisiana, Mississippi, so forth and so on, about what it took to be considered colored or black or Negro. And I think the standard that I ran across was if you had one drop of black blood in you, you were considered black. But there was never a law that was passed that if you had one drop of white blood in you. I just thought that was rather, I'm just throwing things out there. I mean,
Well, that's because of capitalism, James. Because think about this. If you are raping your female slaves, would you rather lose property or gain property from it?
Powerful point.
This is a very capitalist nation. So anything that improves your chances of gaining property and wealth, the law is going to lean that way. And it's funny because think of how many people would find out they were black. I mean, I watch a lot of things, and one of the things I love to watch is Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, Finding Your Roots. And he's helped, or if you want to use the word helped, several people discover that they are not as white as they thought they were, including Carly Simon, who discovered that her great-grandmother is an Afro-Cuban woman. Ty Burrell found out that he has an enslaved ancestor. Oh yeah, lots of people who think they're white aren't, or at least by America's definition. So I think if we were truly to test everybody in America, we'd be shocked at how few white people were left.
Brother Williams, has that ever crossed your mind or come through any path of education?
Yeah, I thought I used to refer to it as three drops of blood. I have no idea how they get to the difference between 1 to 2 and 3 drops, but we heard that, and I share the same perspective that Bill said in regards to you have to look at it from a capitalistic standpoint, as well as just dealing with the ruling class and the what they're referring to as the dominant, or what we always considered the recessive gene, but the dominant factor in terms of purity in from a European standard. So the lighter you were, even from a European standard, the better off you was, the more pure you were. And so and also during that time period, being able to be pale skin, real pale skin, was a privilege because it meant that you didn't have to. Delivery of your order. For more information, or if you want to contact our customer.
Okay,
I got
Bill.
So for the light skin, being pale skin meant you had you were real privileged in that you didn't have to do any field work or oversee field work. So even from that standpoint, it was one of those things that was meant to be in terms of showing how prestige you were in your environment. Hopefully we get them back, but I keep going because I assume we're recording. So in dealing with being elite and one of the in and the few, the lighter your skin, regardless of your race, just the better off you were, or the more pure you were within that white class, and especially as it applies to that upper class. So I think when it came to dealing with the African or the darker skinned people, it was just based upon the economics of the day, as well as what they felt you were more suited for based upon the tone of your skin. So if you was real dark, then obviously you were more suited for being able to work the field better. And if you were light skinned, they assumed you had a little bit of more intelligence, and so now you can kind of sort of be trusted to work in the house and know how to keep your head down and serve other masters at a dinner table, and help deal with the raising and the raising of the children, and doing all of the housekeeping chores. But nonetheless, all that went right back to, like Bill was saying, to the economics. So, and depending on the market that they were attempting to deal with the slaves, it was justifiable to raise a price for a light skin. In some cases, it was more justifiable to raise prices for a dark skin. So they manipulated the market according to what they were offering, what type of African they were offering at the time. And so I just feel like the economy of that time period just dictated that. And keep in mind, when you look at the way the law was, the Constitution, how you was talking about the Constitution, if you check out what what is it, not the American Constitution, but the Confederate Constitution. The Confederate Constitution actually had in it a section in there to where it was forbidden to purchase slaves from anywhere else other than the United States. So it basically became a business of growing, so to speak, or raising your own livestock, which is what they considered us. So at that point, it definitely became more of an economic thing to be able to produce your slave stock. And in producing your slave stock, that's the whole benefit. That's the whole point. So when a slave master at nighttime sneak into the slave quarters, or sneak a slave into his quarters, he's getting a double whammy. He's being able to reproduce more slaves, as well as he's being able to enjoy the fruits of owning slaves and raping, and raping them. And I even looked up something to where, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember the passage in the Bible, but there was some point in the Bible where it talked about the raping of a slave was not considered a sin because it was a slave. And I've heard that passage come across that way.
I think it's in Exodus.
Yeah. So I mean that right there was definitely used to to justify the whole perception, of what was going on during that period. So yeah, it's like, why not have the best of both worlds from that standpoint? You're making more money, and at the same time you indulging in your property.
Another thing when you're teaching culturally reformed teaching, I'm wondering, just like I was saying earlier, I don't think you were here, but I was saying that I've come across some conservative pages where they say that within the next 100 years or so, I think it might have been even as much as 500 years, would civil rights and slavery still be taught in schools. And my question to that is, if you eliminate slavery, are you going to eliminate Christopher Columbus? Are you going to eliminate the Pilgrims? Are you going to tell the truth about Custer's last stand? Are you going to talk about the Trail of Tears? What's your thoughts on that, Brother Williams?
Well, I think when it comes to that, if you're still talking about a environment to where the United States is the world power, I think that they definitely would be leaning more towards still being able to keep Christopher Columbus in the history books, but at the same, but wiping out the idea of slavery, because from that standpoint, it serves. See, you got to look at it from their perspective and how they would see it. It would serve them better from the standpoint of being able to unify around a sentiment that moves everybody within that nation or everybody within that cause on the same path in terms of acceptance than it would to create a division and to create a position to where you have people internally at their throats, as well as going back to just hold the whole idea of reparations. How do you continually expose what's going on from a systematic and systemic aspect of oppression, and then not actually make it right? So if you don't want to bankrupt this country, you have to find a way to eliminate all of the wrongdoing. So either you have to correct what was done wrong, or you have to wipe it out of existence in terms of it ever taking place. So when you look at it from an economic standpoint, going back to what even what Bill was pointing out, which one makes most sense to the elite in the world power? Erasing it, or paying your debts, or making right? Which one is more cost effective? And so from that standpoint, I think it's a lot easier for them to figure out ways to eliminate it from the books than it is for them to actually make it right. And I even will go as far as to, now mind you, I don't have my lifeline that I had last week, but I would even go as far as when you allow other I would say other fights and other battles to take precedence over race, then that helps lean more toward suppressing and trying to push that on the back burner. And so having these other types of struggles come in and take the forefront gives them more opportunity to be able to try to sweep these things under the rug and create this more of an inclusive environment from a historical standpoint.
Bill, I'm still having a problem separating inclusion from integration, except for 53 years.
Okay, so here's your simple roadmap, your guide. Okay, so integration is when you let the black kids sit at your table. Okay, inclusion is when the black kid not only gets to sit at your table, but they get to eat at your table, right? Maybe even eat the same thing you're eating. Maybe. Now, equality is when, which is the thing that they never actually talk about trying to achieve. And then we'll get to equity after that, right? But equality is when, one, you make sure that all the black kids eat enough so that they aren't, deprived. They aren't coming to school hungry. They aren't going home hungry. They aren't being surrounded by an educational system that tells them they're less than or treats them as future criminals, right? That would be when you're getting towards equality. And then equity is when you remove the barriers to education that keep the Black kids from achieving, and you also make sure that the educational process and procedures and systems that surround them give them all the resources and advantages that non-Black kids have, and removes those expectations that Black kids are disruptive or ignorant or dirty or all the long list of things that they're still in people's minds that Black kids are. A threat, right? That's the main, oh, they're a threat. So when you're being quote unquote inclusive, right? It's like, hey, I'm going on vacation. It's all inclusive. It has all the stuff I want. Look, here's my Black friend. He's all inclusive. Hey, right? It's inclusive. He came with it. He's part of the deal. And when people talk about inclusion, and I think that a lot of it comes from a good place. We just had this wonderful woman on earlier who, obviously was with a Black man, married a Black man, has 2 Black children. Her heart is very much in the right place. She is a good person. However, there's things she just doesn't get. And it's not necessarily even her fault. There's an entire culture, and she's overcome a lot to get to where she is, but there's an entire culture telling her some things that frankly aren't true. Even though she's had experiences that most white people haven't had, there's experiences that she can't have in America, and probably not many other places. I mean, even in South Africa, right? One of my professors was an expert consultant to the South African government when they had to end their apartheid. Once again, just like in America, they had 2 separate school systems where, I mean, they were entirely separate and they had to turn into one. Similar to here, you have these things that everyone says we're quote unquote separate but equal, and you realize when the separation goes away how unequal everything was. When the Black kids first see what white schools look like in South Africa, it's like, what? Right? Right? And then vice versa, right? A lot of these white kids, when they're first seeing the Black kids had to go to school in their country, they're in shock. It's like, they have this in our country? It looks like this, right? There is a blind spot that America has and has always had about what it really means to be Black in America. White people think they know, which is so funny to me. And a lot of them, once again, I think they're the best intentions, but they don't really get it. They don't really understand how different every aspect of your life is because of this, what is it? 3 millimeters or so worth of skin tissue, right? On your epidermis. And the culture that comes with it is a culture of survival, right? When we talk about why Black people do certain things and think certain things and act certain ways, it's about survival, right? We've had to have a survival mindset. And there's advantages and disadvantages to having a survival mindset. Just like when you're going through survival training, James, you're not thinking about 10 years from now, you're trying to survive survival training. And so, unfortunately, the same thing has happened to Black America. We're not able to build certain things, so we don't care about building certain things. I'm trying to live to tomorrow. I'm trying to have enough to pay this rent. I'm trying to do such and such. I can't be thinking about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in the future. And so that's why white people and Black people in America, even when they are very good friends, and they've known each other forever and all this stuff, don't truly know each other in certain ways.
See, now, Brother Robert, he's saying the same things that we were saying in the Black community in 1972. Why do we still have the same message now? Why haven't we came any further? And can we survive if we just stay in survival mode?
I don't agree with staying in survival mode, and I believe what we're basically talking about is what we call self-determination. Self-determination goes into recognizing and wanting to formulate an identity by which we, as African people here in the United States, can build our own levels of equality.
But
And
that's the same message that you delivered to me when I was in prison in 1972. The message is the same. Why does it matter? The progress matches the message.
the progress don't match the message because it is so far removed from what most of us consider achievable as Black people. And because of going back to what let me throw another dynamic in there that deal with things when he talks about inclusion is I look at it as not necessarily inclusion but a simulation. So we have been assimilated in dealing with an assimilated people and an assimilated lifestyle. When you try to put yourself in a position removed from that assimilation, then a lot of fear and a lot of doubt and a lot of damn, it's really that different between where they are and where I am comes into play. And it typically scares people. So then from that standpoint, you run right back to accepting or trying to make best with the so-called inclusion. And so then we stay huddled in this individuality thing and be like, well, I'm going to do the best I can to raise my family out of being affected by quote unquote poverty, or get the best things I can for my next generation within my family structure. But again, we tend to forget that as far as a coming together in having a Black community versus being confined to a Black hood, a Black neighborhood, it just doesn't exist. And that's why people like myself continue to push that narrative, because we recognize that power only respects power. And going back to what we're talking about when we talk about being able to sit at the table, if it's one thing to where they have decided to help to make right what has been done wrong. And it's another thing to be in a position to where, regardless of whether they decide to come around, you recognize that you have to put yourself in a position of power. See, we can continue to, I would consider, either beg or hope to try to make them better, to see the errors of their ways, or we could just recognize that, look, we need to pull ourselves up, and we need to change our perspective and not allow ourselves to be continue to be the prey. And I think when we have that mentality, it forces them to have to change the way they are, versus waiting and just simply trying to shame them to death. And I think that's where we're at now. We're at the shaming stage. And I definitely feel like through social media, that's what you're experiencing. A lot of people operating off of the shame of what they're recognizing they're doing. And so we're using that as an advantage instead of our own strength. We're using shaming them as an advantage to try to move forward.
Bill, you want to comment?
So one of the big things, and once again, the current boogeyman, the current thing that the right has been banging away at is critical race theory. And once again, 97% of them, despite this thing they keep talking about, couldn't tell you what it is, right? Couldn't define it.
No,
So,
have no idea. None.
no, none, right? They no more than you could eat, soup with a fork. So you have this situation, right, where people talk about, white guilt and whatever. What people keep talking about as white guilt is actually simply white recognition of accountability, but nobody wants to use those words because those. But guilt is a touchy-feely emotional word, and we don't want people to feel guilty. So let's make this all go away. Yeah. So when you are in a situation where simply telling people what actually happened in the country where they live, not so far back as people actually think. I can get back to chattel slavery this easily, right? My father was raised by his grandparents, Sarah and Thomas Carroll, both of whom were the first people in their families born outside of slavery. Their parents and older siblings were all born slaves. That's how quickly I can get back to slavery. But people always talk about it as if we're talking about something that is the Pleistocene era, right? They talk about something that happened, while the Diplodocus and Stegosaurus were walking the earth. No, this is something that was a handful of generations ago, right? And then following that, you still had, de facto chattel slavery through being able to throw black people in jail en masse for things like vagrancy or what's the other one? Loitering, right? So if you weren't constantly working somewhere, probably for a white person, even if you were doing something like you had your own little business, like say you're a shoe shine or whatever it is, but you're walking down the street and you can't prove that you belong to someone, boom, you're in the jail, right? So and now you're all that's the sounds of the men working on the chain gang. Like where did the chain gang come from, kids? Right? It's people who were scooped up. People talk about mass incarceration. This is nothing new. Mass incarceration started in the late 1860s as freed black people were about to try to do things, right? They cooked up these various ways to put these things on people's records to, one, get free slave labor back, because once again, that's the loophole, right? In the amendment is that slavery is illegal unless it's part of your incarceration, part of your working off your debt to society.
Hard labor.
Right. But on top of that, it also removes you from what? The voting pool, right?
Mhm.
So what's the South trying to do? It's trying to get black people off the voting rolls and back to breaking their backs in the hot sun. So when people say, why do we have to learn these things? Why do we have to know these things? And slavery was so long ago, blah, blah, blah. No, it wasn't. First of all, no, it wasn't. Second of all, the echoes, the ripples that came from, slavery, which, can trace it all the way back to Point Comfort, Virginia, not far from where I grew up, 1619, right? The second time the Mayflower comes back, what's it full of? Slaves, not pilgrims. Right? There's no profit in bringing over pilgrims. The money's in slaves. So you have to realize that this nation was reshaped by slavery in every way, culturally, linguistically, militarily, financially, socially, genetically. Like, there's not a way that America was not changed by slavery. In every single way that people can be affected by something, slavery affected this nation in all of those ways. And unless and until you teach holistically with the understanding that the slave trade, race, and racism has touched upon every aspect of American life, then what are you teaching? You surely are teaching history.
Brother Robert, I don't know how Facebook is going to react, but I'm sure that Bill has probably committed blasphemy as far as a lot of evangelicals are concerned by saying that the pilgrims had slaves. How dare you, Bill? You have been reading that fake news again, and Brother Robert, you take it from here.
Well, I would think, in one of the things Bill's addressing goes into the fact that what you do in terms of starting to rewrite history is you have to date it and have to push it further and further and further back. And so the illusion of it being a long time ago is part of that process of rewriting it in terms of history. That's how you go about doing that. Is you want to disconnect it from as much as possible from anything that is currently going on, and make somebody that's talking about it as such as if they are just kind of off their rocker or an extremist. So, when we start talking about black culture, then you're an extremist, and so I just find that to be awful funny that, the things we're talking about in being able to just dive into the recognition of our heritage makes you an extremist. And at the same time, what this modern day society here in the United States would not ever want to accept is the fact that the reason why the United States is the world power it is today is slavery. That hurts. That hurts when they think about that, because that basically means all of the benefits that this class is in every all the current generations of thinking are basically living off of is a result of slave labor, and they don't want to accept that. So that basically means that if there was no slaves, the United States would not be where it is today, and we would either be looking at China or the Germans or someone else ruling the world. So for the United States to just actually admit to that level that everything that it has become in terms of its greatness is because of the wealth of labor that it had, and the obvious criminalization of a whole entire race of people. Then again, it's like I say, turning over the keys. And why would they want to turn over the keys? It's way more beneficial and more economically and more sound in terms of maintaining a world power, a world power position, to just erase history and erase the mentality that goes along with any activity or anything that stands up against it. That's part of why I emphasize how, when we in the past, how, the greatest threat to internal security of the United States is still black identity extremism. It's not these crazy folks running around that try to insurrect the Capitol. It's not that. Is not the rise of the polarization that Donald Trump did to bring out the racism and make it front and center in terms of recruitment of white supremacists. It is still black identity. And notice how those words have been termed: black identity extremism. So just talking about my identity or wanting to deal with me being black as an identity is an extreme position. And then it automatically also makes me what? Anti-Semitic. So those are the two sides of that same coin that you deal with by just wanting to know more about who you are and your greatness. You're automatically anti-Semitic and you're automatically an extremist. So though black people don't want to be labeled that. And so we find too often that we put ourselves in continue to put ourselves in docile positions because we don't want to be looked upon as this extreme example, simply because we want to learn more about who we are and practice being in our own position comfort zone in terms of who we are as a people. And so it's those things like that continue to work the narrative and continue to make it possible for less of our people to want to step up and recognize, the thing we talk about in again, what you said about in the 70s and the 60s and what we identified with as self-determination. So we move from that. So when you have these kind of moves that even want to address civil rights, like what's happening with the Democrats in Texas, they're on the verge of being extremists. And then so what comes to the forefront of that situation is them emphasizing the whole COVID thing that took place with them. So they find ways to continue to strip us from anything that simulates us attempting to have power or regain power, just in terms of trying to address equality. Because Bill, that's all they're talking about, is addressing equality and holding the Constitution, the amendments of the Constitution to what it says, to the paper that is written on.
I think they're still talking about inclusion, not equality, which once again,
Assimilation.
puts me on the side of the extremes. So call it what you want. Bill, glad for you to join our conversation, man. As always, you impart some knowledge. Why don't you give us your final thoughts, and I will see you Thursday.
So, as you know, as I've mentioned many more times than I probably should, I grew up in America's South, North Carolina and Virginia. And like I said, people talk about things as if they were a very long time ago. And I remember a bunch of people younger than I and younger than you, probably younger than you, Brother Williams. I don't know your age, but I'm just guess that you're probably older than the young people I'm talking about. I started watching something, a show that unfortunately has since been canceled despite being excellent, called Lovecraft Country. A beautiful, amazing young black woman, Misha Green, is the writer and creator of it. And if you don't follow her on Twitter or whatever it is, I highly recommend it. She's very bright and she has some awesome things to say. But one of the things that a bunch of young black people apparently were just exposed to was the Black Travelers Guides that I know until the early 70s, black people were still using. I don't know, but I know
Green Book. The Green Book.
Right, exactly.
Very familiar with it. Very
I
familiar.
know you are. I know you are. And I'm pretty familiar. And like I said, I don't know about Brother Williams. I remember, in my early childhood, on long trips, like if you were driving to St. Louis, you're driving to wherever, consulting that to make sure that you would put yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when people say, why do we need critical race theory, why do we need whatever, I don't care what you call it. We need to holistically teach history. We teach history very poorly here. We teach history the same way that, that person who doesn't get paid to be the quote unquote handyman, they just get like a discount on their rent. That's all they get. They don't get an actual check. The way that person paints your apartment, that's how we treat it. We treat history. That's how we teach history. Just enough so that you can't see the last coat of paint. So there's just enough history so you can't see everything that's behind it peeking through. We have this tendency in this country to want to go once over lightly. And unless and until we're willing to deeply and perhaps even painfully immerse ourselves in the truth of American history, which also by its very nature will have to include the history of black people in the Americas. I didn't just say America, I said the Americas. Do you know how few people I talked to know that there was a black president in Colombia in 1828? Do you know people think I'm crazy when I tell them this? And then they look it up, it's like, oh, right? People don't seem to understand that most of Central and parts of South America are black, right? Cuba is a majority black country, which is part of why we've had problems with Cuba. But I won't no time to get too deeply into that, I guess. But yes, Peru, Colombia, all throughout Panama, like Venezuela. I'm going to leave some places out. The fact is that until we're willing to teach the history of the Americas and the impact that the African diaspora, black people, black Africans, pick a term. I don't care what you call us. We're the same thing no matter what name you slap on us. We've got lots of names slapped on us and pulled off and another one slapped on. But no matter what you call us, it's like you can plant, tulips amongst all the rose bushes. Tulips are still coming up. You can call them tulip roses if it makes you feel good, but they're tulips. We are going to have to really teach history, because is that going to cure all problems? No. Are people who are racist going to suddenly stop being racist when they hear the truth? No, because the truth doesn't at all dent someone who has the armor of racism to protect them from the truth. But what will happen is we, right, the people who want to learn and want to understand, one, will have a better sense of how we got here and how to get the hell out of here in terms of where we found ourselves. Two, the other benefit is that our children, our children's children, our children's children's children, on out, infinitely, will not have that same assumption, at least internally. I can't control what other people assume about, my children or my children's children, but I can tell you that internally, they'll no longer have that same assumption that they are less than, that they are inferior, that they are unable, that somehow that the bad stuff that's happening and happened is somehow because they aren't good or smart or whatever it is. No, it's because there's an entire system built up over hundreds of years to try to stop you from being great, and you were great anyway. So that is my final thought. As always, is an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Phil. I'll see you Thursday.
I hope so.
Well, I'll be there. I'll
be there too.
Okay. Um, Brother Williams, I often speak of it, and to me, it's not a jest, because my outlook on life is that I am a black king, I am a warrior, and I intend to stay on this earth for at least 101 years. So when I tell people that I'm going to be here another 27 years, that is my firm belief as a black man that that is my destiny. Brother
Yeah.
Williams, what I mean, am I too old, or am I thinking too far beyond my means?
Well, I think that you're thinking like what again the powers that be would like to label a black identity extremist.
Proudly,
So
very proudly.
and so like what we have on our one of the points on our 10-point platform, point number 5, we employ an education for our people that exposes the true nature of this devilish decadent American society. The point of us stating that has to do with the fact that, just like what Bill is saying, is when we get down to accepting the real significance of history, why the United States is the way it is, who we are, what our roles have been, and the fact that we are not isolated or not really the minority of the world, but we are the minority of the United States. And the fact that the United States continues to push the narrative of the quote unquote minority, and we accept that because of our lack of knowledge of who we are, and our lack of our culture, and our lack of knowing what our place is. In other words, making us inferior, going back to what y'all say when we talk about the concept of inclusion. Then when we're able to eliminate that, we're able to get down to reality, and change this virtual perception that's going on. Then if the next generation is able to build with that being their baseline foundation to grow upon, versus something from I'm learning this in my 20s, or after I made it to college, and I decided to take up a few Black Studies courses, because it's typically not until we get to that point in our life that we start finding out. And at that point, so much of what you are has already been predetermined in terms of how you're going to pursue life. And so at that point, now that you're pursuing a career that is still based upon white establishment, you're going to learn a little bit more about who you are and become proud of being Black. But at the same time, you still have to put on this other face, another cover. Whereas if our baseline, and this is across the board of with America, period, it faces its ugly truth, and by embracing that ugly truth, find ways to be able to come up with an ability to accept, that wrong has been done wrong. And if they are able to come to grips with the fact that an only true way to address it is to be right, that's going to take us at the same time forcing the narrative of us recognizing the power that we have. And I would say if we actually work toward things in that direction, things may get worse before they get better. But that is simply resistance, and that's simply, what you have when you're dealing with the eye of the storm. So I would hope that, from the standpoint of the listening audience, the younger generations, don't continue to allow yourself to be watered down in terms of the history, in terms of what your parents achieved, in terms of what they went through in order for you to be able to be in the position you're in. It's no different than brother James. You emphasizing the fact that you may have had to walk 9 miles to go to school to get an education, whereas the youth nowadays, if their school ain't up the street, or if they can't get on the bus, or their mom can't give them a ride, 15 minutes up the street, they ain't going to school. It's just the mentality that people have now in terms of just being, I would just call it, just I don't know, sorry. We have to be able to raise our youth in a better, with a more hardened shell about being victorious, a hardened shell about being more stand upish. And then our education that couples with who we are and our identity and what we can bring to the table, you add those together, then now we're at a position of empowerment to where a lot of the things that we're quote unquote begging or trying to shame into existence will take on a different role and a different perspective. And I would like even to say, in just in terms of what's happening with the presidency, in terms of some of the things that Biden is doing, we can't let that fool us. We can't let it fool us and and accept the hand me downs of attempting to have these tokens of doing right versus the fact that we need to really make things right. And I think when you talk about making things right, it comes at a cost, and that cost is accountability. Like we said, like was stated earlier, we have to stand up and accept accountability for the way things are and make that change. And that just means that the younger generation needs to be ready to do so. And so let's continue to connect with that generation and give them as much power that we can so that they can stand up and be ready to face that battle.
Hey, well, I'd like to thank you and Bill and our other guests, Miss Natalie Flute, Javon Flute, and Jillian. We thank them for their participation, and I thank you guys, and I look forward to having another great conversation with you next week, Brother Williams.
All right.
Y'all have
Thank
a good
you,
night.
All right.
Thanks
Thanks for joining, Bill.
My pleasure as always.
All right.